What's happening, everybody? On today's show, we're going to run through our winners of the weekend from SEC Week 7. We had some big winners in Tennessee, Kentucky, Ole Miss, and LSU. Who depressed in Week 7? Well, you can probably guess. Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Remember, Locked On SEC is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube and at LockedOnSEC.com. Let's jump into it. Let's get to our winners of the weekend. And we start with the Tennessee Volunteers. 15 years of anguish and pain came crashing down on Saturday night in Knoxville as Josh Heupel's Tennessee Vols upset the number 3 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide 52-49 in what was a crazy shootout type of game. Final minutes looked a little hairy there for the Vols, but Chase McGrath makes a 40-yard field goal as time expires. Fireworks exploded around Neyland Stadium. Everything glowed orange. The PA blared Rocky Top, followed by Dixieland Delight. As fans rushed to the field, the goalpost came down, cigars were lit up. The Vols had not beaten a top 10 team since 2006 versus Georgia. They had never beaten Nick Saban since he's been the coach at Alabama. They had not scored 21 points against Alabama since 2003. They had 21 points in the first quarter in this one, and they did it without 2 of their better players. Wide receiver Cedric Tillman was still out. Safety Jalen McCullough was out. Hendon Hooker, he threw for 385 yards and 5 touchdowns, all of them to Jalen Hyatt, who is our other winner of the weekend. Jalen Hyatt in this one with 6 catches, 207 yards, and 5 touchdowns, a Tennessee school record. His 5th touchdown catch tied the game at 49 with 3:26 to play. He came up huge. We talked about it a week ago, how he and Rue McCoy really stepped up in the absence of Cedric Tillman these past couple weeks, and boy, did they do so in this game. Crazy to think what it would have looked like had Cedric Tillman played, but the offense absolutely on fire, and what a big win for the Tennessee Volunteers to finally get that monkey off their back and beat Alabama. By the way, the SEC announced on Sunday that they fined Tennessee $100,000 for violating the league's access to the field policy because the fans stormed the field. I get why they do this, and you got to consider everybody's safety, but it just seems so excessive. Like most people kind of looking at this, we're going, why? If there were massive injuries and people were getting hurt and banged up, I get it. I almost wonder, maybe make it a rule. If everyone storms the field and celebrates and nobody gets seriously hurt, then a fine isn't necessary. Again, if it's all in the interest of public safety, just does not seem to be necessary. But hey, the school president even said, hey, no big deal. Now, I did say a post that some people were asking, hey, Tennessee, we got to get some goalposts back for next weekend. So maybe we should be asking for some money to get those goalposts back up. But cool to see that they took them down and took them all the way into the river. And what a big win for Tennessee. Another winner of the weekend from this game. Now, look, I know he lost the game, but I'm showing some love for Bryce Young, who played his first game back after leaving that Arkansas game a couple weeks ago with an injury. 35 for 52 for 455 yards and 2 touchdowns. Even despite falling behind early, Bryce Young stayed poised under pressure, delivered strike after strike to his receivers, connected with 9 different targets. Took Alabama right down the field to set him up for the game-winning field goal in the final minute, but Will Reichard missed it. Not his fault, but it was Bryce Young's second highest passing total of his career, second only behind his 559 he threw against Arkansas last season, and the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. He is still having a very nice season, completing 67% of his passes, over 1,600 passing yards, 16 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions. As long as Bryce Young keeps playing at a high level, he is going to give Alabama a chance to win out. Still some very tough games left in the schedule. They host Mississippi State this weekend, and they have road trips at LSU and at Ole Miss. Not going to be easy, but still a good chance to win out, get to Atlanta, play for an SEC title game, and as we know, if they get there, and whether it's playing a really good Georgia team or a rematch with this same Tennessee team, you can bet Nick Saban's going to have a different game plan if they face this Vols team again next time around. And of course, if you want to place your bets, probably, not a bad bet to say, yeah, Alabama wins out. They're going to beat whoever in the SEC title game. They're going to find a way into the playoff because it's what they do. It just happens. Even when they lose a game, they somehow respond. But let's see. There's still a lot of tough challenges left ahead on the schedule for Alabama. Another winner of the weekend. How about the Georgia defense? Say what you want about how they looked against Kent State and Mizzou a couple weeks ago, but these past 2 weeks against Auburn and Vanderbilt, 2 SEC opponents, the Georgia defense has gotten back to dominating. Kirby Smart's bunch held Vanderbilt to just 150 total yards of offense. Freshman quarterback A.J. Swan threw for just 105 yards. Vandy ran the ball 23 times for just 45 yards. They had just 1 sack on the day from Nolan Smith. Christopher Smith had a handful of tackles and a recovered fumble. It was nothing fancy. It was just dominant football. And the Bulldogs won 55-0. It was their second shutout of the season after they blanked Samford back in week 2. And Georgia is back to allowing just 9.1 points per game on the season. That's the best in the SEC. It's number 2 in the country behind Illinois. And they get a bye week off before they play Florida in the cocktail party down in Jacksonville. And then all eyes will be on that November 5th game when Georgia will host Tennessee. Most likely the SEC East on the line that game between the hedges. And by the way, if you're just starting to look for tickets on the secondary market for that game, already going for $500 and up. So you may want to know somebody if you want to go see Georgia, Tennessee this year. But congrats to Georgia. Nice dominating win, and their defense looks to be dominant as they always are. Another winner of the weekend. How about the Ole Miss run game? Auburn actually put up a pretty good fight in this one, but Ole Miss beat Auburn 48-34. The Rebels run game, they just keep kicking butt and taking names as they rushed 69 times for 448 yards on the ground. It's just the 4th time an SEC West team rushed for that many yards versus an SEC West team this century. That's stat from our buddy Nick Suss. The 69 rushing attempts are the most for a team in a conference game since 2010. Their rushing yards were the most in an SEC game since 1979. And the Rebels are still the best rushing team in the SEC this season. They are 3rd in the entire country behind, of course, run-heavy teams in Air Force and Army. And Ole Miss is averaging 271 rushing yards a game. They average over 500 yards of total offense per game. Quinshon Judkins, still 2nd in the SEC in rushing, 720 rushing yards, right behind Rocket Sanders. And Zach Evans, 4th in the SEC with 605 rushing yards behind Jahmyr Gibbs. So they have 2 of the top 4 rushers in the SEC this year. They are an unstoppable force. First time since 1976, the Rebels had 3 100-yard rushers in a game. Jackson Dart also rushed for over 100 yards this week. And now Ole Miss 7-0, their best start by any Ole Miss team since 1962. However, the Rebel schedule starts to get very tough. Here's what their last 5 games looks like. They're at LSU this week. Then they're at Texas A&M. Then they're home for Alabama. Then they're at Arkansas. And then you get the Egg Bowl. All 5 of those games are tough. All 5 of those games, losable games for Ole Miss. I don't think they lose all 5. But certainly this is the meat of the schedule. This is, after you cruise by the Georgia Techs and the Tulsas and the Central Arkansas earlier in the year, this is where the schedule really starts to get tough. Now, if Ole Miss can keep doing what they're doing, dominant run game, and Jackson Dart making some throws, they're going to win a lot of these games, and they're going to have a very nice back-to-back seasons, possible 10-win seasons with Lane Kiffin at the helm, and that would certainly be exciting. All right, we'll get to some more winners of the weekend in just a second, as we had a lot of folks impressing over the weekend. But first, want to remind you about our friends over at Simply Safe. Look, the numbers don't lie. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen Simply Safe Home Security to protect their home. You don't earn the trust of that many people without doing something right. It's Simply Safe. Your safety is the only thing that matters. I know because we use Simply Safe in our house, protect us with a cutting-edge security technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who always have your back. We love it because, look, whenever you get an alert, it's 24/7 monitoring. The agent will call you. They will contact the tech support staff whenever they need, if you have something wrong. Professional monitoring 24/7. Their agents always there for you when a threat is detected, and they will dispatch police or first responders in an emergency. They use proprietary advanced response technology to visually confirm when a break-in is real. Priority police dispatch. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplysafe.com/lockedoncollege. Save 20% on your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplysafe.com/lockedoncollege to learn more. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Continuing on here on Locked On SEC as we recap SEC Week 7, and we got some more winners of the weekend. So next up, we head back out onto the gridiron, and we find Chris Rodriguez in a game where nobody was really giving Kentucky a chance last week. It was Chris Rodriguez that led the way for the Wildcats in a 27-17 win over Mississippi State. He ran the ball 30 times for 196 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, and Kentucky snapped their 2-game losing streak. That Kentucky defense also did their job, limited Will Rogers, shut down the Bulldogs' run game, but it was Chris Rodriguez who helped Kentucky keep moving the chains, eat up clock, and earn the win to improve to 5-2 on the season. In his 3 games since he came back to the team, Chris Rodriguez has rushed 71 times for almost 400 rushing yards. When he's running well, he can help take that pressure off of Will Levis and help the Wildcats be more balanced. So next up for Kentucky, they get a bye week this week before they head out to Knoxville. Man, that's going to be a monster challenge in taking on the Tennessee Vols up there, but certainly one that Kentucky can hang in it if their defense plays like they did this past week, and if that run game is dominating with Rodriguez and company, they will have a chance. Another winner of the weekend. How about down in the swamp, Jayden Daniels? What in the world was that, Jayden Daniels? Remember 2 weeks ago when Jayden Daniels seemed scared to throw the ball down the field against Tennessee? Well, down in the swamp on Saturday, we saw a very different Jayden Daniels as he combined for 6 total touchdowns in a 45-35 win over the Florida Gators. Jayden Daniels was 23 for 32 passing for 349 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and then added 14 carries for 44 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. Florida's defense has got some issues. Don't get me wrong, but man, if Jayden Daniels can play like that more moving forward, 5-2 LSU is going to be a very dangerous team for folks. And when you look at his numbers, Jayden Daniels now 6th in the SEC in passing yards, 11th in total rushing touchdowns, or total rushing yards, 1st among all quarterbacks in rushing yards, and he has 16 total touchdowns on the year. He has really started to find his groove in that LSU offense. And again, how does he respond? Is this passing game now here to stay? Is he more comfortable in this system? And we're going to see more of this Jayden Daniels moving forward, or will he regress? And we'll see more of what we saw, where he struggled that first half against Florida State and against Mississippi State and against Auburn and, against Tennessee in that entire game. So I don't know, but I know that was a very good Jayden Daniels in the swamp, and he deserves to be one of our winners of the weekend. Another winner of the weekend, KJ Jefferson. It was nice to see him back. It was an odd midseason non-conference road game going up to BYU against a pretty good BYU team, but the Arkansas Razorbacks used a 24-point second quarter to put away the Cougars, winning 52-35. But a big reason was the return of KJ Jefferson, who bounced back in a big way, throwing for 367 yards and 5 touchdowns, while also adding 32 rushing yards. Rocket Sanders, the SEC leading rusher, continued to dominate with 15 carries for 175 yards and 2 scores. Jefferson connected with Matt Landers on 3 different touchdown passes. It was much needed as the Hogs snapped their 3-game losing streak and got back to 4-3 on the season. Next up for Arkansas, it is a bye week before they head on the road at Auburn coming up on the 29th. But welcome back, KJ Jefferson. Much needed, and then Arkansas offense started to look more like they should. Lastly, our last winner of the weekend, I threw Tank Bigbsy in here. I know it was a loss, but Bigbsy led Auburn with 179 yards on 20 carries with a touchdown. Like I said, albeit in a loss, it was the first time since week 1 against Mercer that we really saw Tank Bigbsy look like Tank Bigbsy. It was just his second 100-yard rushing game of the season. And this past weekend, Bigbsy had more rushing yards in this one game than he had in his previous 4 games combined. That tells you how Brian Harsin has continued to misuse, I guess, underutilize a weapon like Tank Bigbsy, but it is a positive sign for a guy like Tank Bigbsy that we thought would be among the SEC leaders in rushing this year. He has really been stymied much of the year, but he's now 7th in the conference in rushing yards behind Devon Achane at A&M. Can we see more of this Tank Bigbsy moving forward? Maybe Auburn will continue to be competitive, kind of like they were this past week, but more to come on that. All right, thank you guys again for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Coming up next, we'll get to our disappointed, our depressed of week 7 in the SEC. You don't want to miss that. That's coming your way in just a second. But first, I want to remind you guys, BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting throughout the season. If you haven't been there yet, what are you waiting on? Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, and analysis on every game you can find over at BetOnline. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information. They got live betting, up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there, the fastest and easiest way for you to check in on all your favorite games and events, including college football, NFL, every sport, they got you covered there. Head on over to betonline.net. You could do so on your mobile device and learn more. I always tell you guys, pull it up on your cell phone. It should be the first place you check every day before you make any wagering decisions, particularly on game days and Saturdays. It's the spot you want to be checking to get all the latest information. And it is BetOnline, and it is where the game starts. Final segment here on Locked On SEC, and we've done all of our winners of the weekend. We've had a lot of them, but now we got to get to who depressed this week, and we got to start with the Alabama defense. Look, it was not great for Alabama. We know Hendon Hooker is special, and that up-tempo offense for Tennessee is really good. But what happened to this Alabama defense that some people were saying before the season, this could be one of the best in recent years? You got Will Anderson back. You got Dallas Turner. You got all these big-time pieces. 1 sack in this game. That came from Big DJ Dale. Dallas Turner, he did recover that fumble, returned it for a score. DeMarco Helms, he came up with Hendon Hooker's first interception of the season. Kool-Aid McKinstry had the second one, but it was negated by a pass interference call late in this game. The Vols, 567 total yards of offense, and the 52 points allowed by Alabama were the most allowed in a game in the Nick Saban era in Tuscaloosa. It was the most allowed by the Crimson Tide since giving up 54 points to Sewanee back in 1907. We're having to go back over 100 years ago. That's how bad this Alabama defense was on Saturday. A Tide, used to their pass defense being a strength and forcing turnovers. Alabama has just 3 interceptions on the season. That is 12th in the SEC. Interceptions aren't all the stats, but we're used to Alabama being a leader in that statistic. And again, not getting the turnovers. Where's Eli Ricks? Where's all the big-time playmakers in that secondary that we were expecting to really shore up and take away some of the big receivers that they would face? Did not see it this past weekend. Another depressed of the weekend. How about the Florida defense? I still think there are some guys on Florida's defense playing hard. Ventrell Miller, he hit a monster game against LSU, led them in tackles. But the rest of the guys, it was ugly as the Gators gave up 45 points and over 500 yards of offense in their loss to LSU. A week after playing Missouri pretty well defensively, forced a couple turnovers, they had no answer for Jayden Daniels as the Gators gave up the most points all season long. Their third down defense is dead last in the country, ranking 131st. LSU was 8 for 12 on third downs on Saturday and a perfect 2 for 2 on fourth downs. They have got to figure out how to get this defense playing better. Next up, they get a bye week before the big rivalry game against Georgia coming up on the 29th. Another depress of the weekend. I put the Auburn defense in here. We talked about the record rushing numbers that Ole Miss put up this past weekend, but that's now back-to-back weeks that Auburn's defense allowed over 40 points in a game. It's the third time they've done it this season. They did it to Penn State earlier in the year. And for knowing Brian Harsin is potentially on the hot seat, his DC Jeff Schmedding is just not getting the job done right now with this defense. According to ESPN's Pete Thamel, though, the Tigers' ongoing search for an athletic director has caused there to be, quote, less urgency to make a decision on Brian Harsin's future as the head coach. A lot of people thought, heck, we thought by today we'd be talking about Brian Harsin being fired. Sounds like they're going to maybe wait a little bit and make a decision on who the new athletic director is and let that person make the call on, all right, are we getting rid of Harsin and are you hiring your guy? We'll see what happens in the coming days, 2 weeks. But that's where we are right now. Brian Harsin, at least at the time of this recording, still the head coach at Auburn. Another depress of the weekend. I got Will Rogers at Mississippi State. Look, just a week ago, Will Rogers torched Arkansas. This Kentucky defense this past weekend did a solid job of limiting Will Rogers. They held him to just 203 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. It was Rogers' lowest output of the season, even worse than his 214 passing yards he had at LSU in the loss earlier this year. It's as simple to say this. When Will Rogers is dominating in the passing game, Mississippi State's winning games. When he's not, they're finding themselves with a loss. They fell to Kentucky 27-17. LSU held them to just 16 points in that loss earlier in the year. In their 5 wins, they scored 39 points or more. So, look, if you're being held in the teens, State's losing. If you're getting in the 30s, they're winning those games. You got to wonder if Kentucky maybe reached out to Matt House, who used to coach there and obviously limited Rogers in that game in Baton Rouge a few weeks ago. Maybe they took some things away from that game film. But next up for Mississippi State, they head to Tuscaloosa. No time to, sit back and relax. You are playing a wounded Alabama team that is very hungry to get back into the win column. So that is going to be difficult. And then lastly, our last depress of the weekend, I threw Vandy's offense in here. Look, I want to keep expectations reasonable for Vanderbilt because we know what they're up against. And we gave them their praises earlier in the season when they started 3-1. Nobody thought they'd get to 3 wins. But these last 3 games, blowout losses in the SEC where they gave up 55, 52, and 55 points. Clark Lee has got to start recruiting hard and look at that transfer portal and try to get some dogs in there because Vandy's just not competitive in the SEC right now. Next up, they will head to Missouri this weekend. That's one they can be competitive in. Maybe they can find a way to win that one. But the Vandy offense, 0 points in their game against Vanderbilt, and then the defense, or against Georgia, and then the defense just giving up points in the 50s. Not going to get it done. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Now go make your second listen. Check out some of our other great podcasts on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day, whether it's Locked On Auburn, Locked On Ole Miss, Locked On Florida, Locked On Bama, LSU, whatever it is. Go subscribe and give them a listen. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Special guest going to be joining us this week. Ole Miss safety AJ Finley going to join us. You don't want to miss that, as we'll talk about the 7-0 Ole Miss Rebels with him. I'm Chris Gordy. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow right here on Locked On SEC.